God, it's a huge effort for me to get up and hello, we are now live.
It worked.
Love stack. But we tend to think that maybe we're live a little bit before it says that we're live. But anyway, hello,
Forever awkward.
Erica. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. I'm good. We've just come off a long weekend here in Melbourne, which is why we didn't go live yesterday. So I'm good. I needed an extra day this weekend, so it was nice. How are you?
A good reset. Yeah, I feel good. Now that the sun has warmed up outside, I mean, we're having beautiful days at the moment here in Brisbane, but that means no cloud cover. And so for us, Queensland,
Cold.
Once it hits under 25 degrees Celsius, we go, my God, it's cold. And so we have our fresh mornings right now. So it's taking me a little while to warm up, literally.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Hard to have sympathy as a Melburnian. I'm like 25. I mean, it was 12 degrees yesterday total.
And that's without the wind chill, I bet. It probably felt like 9 or something.
It was really cold. It's actually super miserable in Melbourne. It's like grey as anything and very wet and very cold. So, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we're indoors. I've got the heater on. Life's good. And today, for our little fireside chat, we have decided to start peppering in discussions about books that we have enjoyed reading. Not so much a book club, but, just thoughts about a book. And I think it's a great idea. That was Erica, that was your idea, brilliant idea. And one that we want to kick it off with today is this one. This book.
It also looks like this.
Yeah, depending on if you bought it.
Two versions.
It is Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. And when people say this book changed my life, maybe they say it flippantly, but I don't say it flippantly about this book. It has literally changed my life. And it's thanks to you, Erica, because you introduced me to this book, I think a couple of years ago now, easily a couple of years ago. And it did literally change my life. So, and I know it's a favourite of yours too.
Yeah, I recommend it to a lot of people. It's one of those books, one of the things that I really like about it, the reason I recommend it to lots of people is because it's written really well in terms of a sort of science book. I've spent a lot of time reading, science and anatomy and things like that. And they can be so boring and so dry, and it's so sometimes hard to understand what you're supposed to do with it and how it relates to like a normal everyday life. But this is one of those books that like you can just use as a person who isn't necessarily in that field. It's very interesting. He's written in a way that is like storytelling, I think. So yeah, he's done a really good job with it. But again, it does have the power to really change your life. And I think because it changes your nervous system, which is like my favorite everything.
Yeah.
But I would love to know, and I'm putting you on the spot because we didn't really talk about what we were going to say, but I want to know how, like specifically how it changed your life. Like what were you feeling before? What did you change? And then that might give people a bit of an insight into what they find inside this book.
Yeah. Well, in the book, as you just mentioned, it's a really interesting read. It's a different read because there's 10 years of research in this book. Like it's not just something he's read a few articles and away he goes. James Nestor, bless you, has gone super deep with understanding a lot of scientific studies and the work that people have done. And he calls them pulmonauts, which I love. But and then he goes through the day-to-day of, so today I'm trying this technique out, or we're doing this particular breath technique. And then he talks about how that impacts his life. And one of the techniques, if there's one thing that struck me more than anything else, was the power of the exhale. And I'd never really focused on my breath much at all. Never been able to hold my breath underwater for very long either. I've never been a big, lung capacity kind of person. But once I started consciously focusing on not only improving the volume of air that I take in with an in-breath, but then the long exhale and really squeezing out everything that I can from that, I just found pretty much after probably the third breath, definitely after the third breath, maybe even the second, I just started to relax completely. And I just straight away, and I thought, wow, that's what struck me the most about all of the techniques. And he talks about, heaps of techniques that you can try um, in this book as well. But that's the one that's made the biggest shift
Yeah.
to me. And then at about the same time, I started doing yoga just myself using the Sarah Beth app. Sarah
Mhm.
Beth, if you're listening, I know you're probably not, but if you are, by some miracle, love your work. And again, that's, movement with conscious breathing. And then the two kind of came together and I started to appreciate the power of breath work. And now it's one of my favorite go-tos and things to focus on.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Mm.
Yeah, and probably in summary, like you said, Anita, there's a lot of practices in here, but probably like the key things that he talks about is nasal breathing. So
Mhm.
breathing through your nose, not through your mouth, which is really how humans are supposed to breathe. And he talks about all the reasons why that makes a difference. That's probably like if I think back, and it's been probably 5 years since I read this, 4 or 5 years, so it's been a little while, but if I think about what the main takeaways are, I think it's that. I
Mhm.
think like the ideal breath, he talks a little bit about the ratio of the inhale to exhale and how many breaths we should be taking a minute. And for the most part, we breathe too quickly.
And shallowly.
Yeah, too quickly, too shallowly. And he talks about how what we're really doing when we train our breathing is increasing our tolerance to carbon dioxide buildup in our system.
Mm.
And that's a fascinating little bit of science because when you talked about like not being able to hold your breath underwater, um, we think of that as being, I need more oxygen. But what it actually is, I can't tolerate the buildup of carbon dioxide in my system. And so when we learn to breathe sort of better, for want of a different term, we increase our capacity to tolerate that buildup of carbon dioxide. And that's actually the marker for, um, I guess, the breath capacity. So when we don't get oxygen hungry, we just actually get more like intolerant of the buildup of carbon
Yeah.
dioxide in our system. And so he talks about the science of like how the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen works. And like it is kind of nerdy in that regard, but really good takeaways. And then some of the practices are a bit out there. Some of the things that he explored and experienced are definitely more complicated, definitely have more like potential for um, hyperventilating, things like that. But some of them are just so simple and so grounded. And I think what you just talked about, that extended exhale, um, they're based in science. Like there's a scientific reason why, or there's a physiological reason why you feel more relaxed after just 3 breaths, um, which I could talk about a little bit if you want to. But I think what you've said is like, yeah, it gives you the knowledge to understand why these things make a difference. And they're not that complicated at the end of the day.
No, and I think that's why I mean, I've got a million things going off in my mind that we can talk about, but, I think that's what I love about breathwork is that it's free, it's completely accessible any time of day and night. We have
Mhm.
this within us, and that's what I'm learning as I'm exploring and more about our beautiful, amazing bodies, is that we have inbuilt in us ways in which we can improve our health and well-being. And breath work is something that we all have access to. And then part of me goes, well, there's really no excuse. Like where how else can you tick all those boxes in other forms of exercise? Like
Mm.
very rare. And you can do it lying down and in bed, you can do it standing up, you can do it when you're exercising, to improve your performance, whatever. But it's there and it's within you.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it too. Um,
Yes.
I've been actually this morning, a couple of things I've done. You mentioned the nasal breathing, because I did have a little bit of a refresher yesterday and I was listening to a couple of YouTube um, clips that James did. And, feel free to do a Google search, whoever's listening, and do that. But in the book, he mentions that what our nose is lined with, it's the same cells as our how do I put this? Our erectile cells. So,
Oh, yes.
yes, there is a connection right here to, penises and clitoris and nipples. Same
Mm,
cell, right? So there is a connection physically in our bodies that way. And also with nasal breathing, great thing is because of the nitric oxide um, enhancement, and we breathe more efficiently that way as well, so nitric oxide, I'm definitely going to, I'd love to go down the rabbit hole with that one day as well, because the benefits of nitric oxide to our body is enormous. But that's
mhm.
another reason why we need that for cardiovascular health and all sorts of things. But that's what nasal breathing does. What else have I done for
Well, and
you?
it naturally slows your breath down too. So part of the reason that we will end up breathing through our mouth when we exercise, particularly if we're doing like cardiovascular exercise, is because when you get to blow out a lot of carbon dioxide really quickly, and so when you think about that intolerance to carbon dioxide, um, elevated levels in your system, the quickest way to get rid of that is to like puff it out. And so it's quite hard to do cardiovascular exercise and breathe through your nose. But that's one of the things that he talks about is increasing your ability to be able to breathe in and out through your nose, because it is essentially retains more of that carbon dioxide for longer, and you kind of develop bit of a tolerance. But you'll notice that if you breathe through your nose, that exhale automatically, well, everything really slows down because you've got a much smaller entry point and exit point, and so it slows your breathing down. So people who breathe through their mouth tend to breathe at a higher rate than people who breathe through their nose.
Yeah. And he also talks about in the book how there's another scientist, I can't remember his name, but where the tolerance for how much you should be pushing your body in an exercise is as long as you can breathe in and out of your nose. So if you
Hmm,
then have to resort to breathing in and out of your mouth, that's kind of a signal that you are doing too much. You're overexerting yourself. So
mhm.
yeah, it's kind of, that's a bit of a barometer too, is how well you're breathing through your nose in terms of the exertion that you put on your body from a
Interesting.
exercise point of view. Yeah, really interesting.
Mm.
I now also tape my lips at nighttime when I sleep, and I have found that at first it was a little bit tricky. I felt, oh, I'm not getting enough oxygen in, and as you say, carbon dioxide out, breathing, felt a bit constricted. But the more I did it, the more it opened up and the easier it got. And now it's really good. And I bought these little, I was using Micropore at first for that, but then I found it wasn't too bad. But then, as it happens, I was in a shop in Bowral, random shop, random location, and they had a box of little lip tapes. So purpose made, they're shaped like a peanut, a peanut shell, sort of like
Yeah.
that shape. And you can either put it north to south or east to west across your mouth. And because they're a certain size, it means that if you need to, like if you need to cough or something, you've
Yeah,
still
you
got
can.
the ability through your mouth rather than covering up all of your mouth,
Yes.
which I personally, I think I would feel like I was being held captive.
Yeah, I don't think that's recommended as I think you usually do it so you can, if you need to, get
If
out
you
part
need
of your
to.
mouth. So do
Yeah.
you think you were sleeping, breathing through your mouth when you were asleep?
Oh, I know I was, because I was waking
Yeah.
up, and that's even during my sleep, I was waking up with a very dry mouth, and
Ah,
I
yes.
hated that feeling, and I knew it was waking me up as well. And then
Mm,
I was starting to snore a little bit, asking my husband, "How was your sleep?"
yes.
"Oh, not too bad, but you did snore." It's like, "Oh, did I? Don't realize
Yeah.
that." But again, when I put the tape on my lips and sleep at night, I'm not snoring.
Yes. I have a few friends that also read this around the same time, and the difference in that nighttime sleep, just like I remember one friend talking to me and just being like, she was just like, I cannot believe the difference this has made to my life. Just such a simple thing, learning to breathe through my nose. Um, it is so interesting. And part of the thing, right, we sort of were talking before we hit live, we were talking about I guess maybe sometimes people's resistance to trying
Yeah.
things like this. Um, and one of the things that always helps me when I'm trying to do something new is to understand why it works, right? Like why it's actually so helpful. I think one of the problems that we have as we get older is that we're very stuck in our habits, which is by design. Like our brains like habit. It's really easy to just get through life doing what you've always done because it's got a track record. And so some of these things, it can feel like a lot of work, or we might be like, oh, I have insomnia, so I need to just go get something from the doctor, which sometimes is true, but also there are these things that we can try. But the really cool thing about breathing is that it's the only part of our autonomic nervous system that we can control. So when you think about, we talk a lot about the nervous system and being regulated or dysregulated, and regulation or dysregulation will always show up in your breath, always, because you can kind of not be like, if you think about our primitive instincts, if a lion was chasing us, of course you'd need to breathe more quickly and to have the energy to run away. And so stress will always show up in your breathing. And so that simple practice that you were talking about of extending your exhalation, that is linked with your nervous system. And it's the only direct access point that we have. We can't control our heart rate just by thinking about it. We can't, sort of change the way our nervous system perceives threat just by hoping that it works. There's some ways we can do that, but it's literally the only part of our nervous system we can say, I'm consciously going to change how this is functioning. And so we can send such good information to our body and our brain about being okay, about having things under control, just by changing the way that we breathe. And to me, that's just phenomenal. Like, what an amazing thing to have at your disposal that doesn't require anything other than what's already built into the system. Um, so, yeah, I feel like people need to definitely do themselves a favor.
I think so too. And give it a go. Just experiment. I mean, what have you got to lose? But on that point, there are so many different techniques. And I happened to be talking to a friend of mine recently because she hadn't spoken to me since I got back from India. So a lot of these techniques that are mentioned in the book are ancient techniques, right? They're done by yogis, and yoga was actually a breath practice before it became a movement practice about 100 years ago. But prior to that, it was breath. And we just got onto the subject somehow. And she said, oh, I've been on a walk with some girlfriends, and one of them is a breathwork specialist. That's what she does now. And so we did a particular breathwork practice, and she said she started crying. That it actually released some trauma or something that was in her, and it was really unexpected. So I guess what I'm saying is there is power in this, and different techniques may, as you say, trigger different aspects of our nervous system, and therefore it may bring out a certain response in our body as well. Well, that was her account of it. And I said to her, well, that's fairly full on. And she was obviously doing it with someone who is very practiced in this and was very deliberate in the practice. Whereas, me, I've never had that experience, just taping my lips and sleeping at night. So that's interesting in itself. So it's almost like you have this spectrum again of ways in which it can influence your body and what it can do for you. That's one. And then in the book, James, the other thing that blew my mind in terms of how it changes our body physiologically is that it can change our bones and our other organs just by the way we breathe. So he talks about how scoliosis patients, some of them, have got curvature of the spine, how their spines have been corrected just through doing, dedicated particular breathwork techniques and some movement associated with that as well. Our soft and hard palates changing shape, the way that we breathe. So again, it's just not lung capacity, our lungs and the volume of air and the fact that we breathe something like 25,000 times a day. It's amazing how much air we take in and how often we do it. And it's that consistency, just like you talked about habits before, I guess. It's that consistent practice, that consistency that then goes to shape our bodies as well, which
Mm.
that was absolutely mind blowing. And it's backed by science, like studies that have been done. Yeah.
He tells a story, doesn't he, about going into the, I can't remember what it's called, but where all the skulls were underground. Um, I'm sure that was from this book where they saw like the way that it changed the bone structure of these skulls from ancient
Oh,
civilizations to
right,
today.
right.
And how, yeah, the sort of the increasing prevalence of mouth breathing has literally changed our bone structure in our faces.
Mhm.
Um, it is really interesting. One of the things that I will say, though, like with your friend who had that emotional release, I think that is what probably puts people off sometimes is the
Yeah.
fear of things like that. And there's so many levels of using the breath, like
Mhm.
just learning to breathe a little bit more deeply, a little bit more evenly, learning something simple like the extended exhalation breath. That sort of tends to be where I play because I think that we can get a lot of results just
Yep.
from very simple
100%.
practices.
Yep.
And then there are other things like in the yoga world, there's like different practices, like the fire breath. Wim Hof has a method which gets talked about in here. And some of those, like, I don't have any interest in practicing. They, cause you to hyperventilate. And different things, so they all have a different influence on your brain and the hormones in your body and how you feel, and so you don't have to do anything extreme to get some impact. But I do think that that's something that scares people. And I know sometimes when I work with clients one on one and we do breath stuff, or even when I teach it in my programs, and it's important to recognize that for some people, it actually does increase anxiety. So we can talk about the science all day long and be like, it works and it does this and it does that. But for some people who have had things going on that there's trauma related to that process or anxiety, when they experience anxiety, they're really hyper aware of their breathing. Sometimes focusing on breathing will actually feel awful. So I want to just say that because if anyone's listening and being like, oh, but when I do breath work, it feels awful and everybody's saying that I should like it. I think like everything, trust your body's response more than anything else
Yes. Yes.
because it might not be right now. And so we can, like, I would recommend this book to everyone. And I think breathing practices are so important, but not if when you do them, you experience negative effects. And that is very valid and it is very real. And don't let anyone tell you that you're doing it wrong. It just might be that there's something else that needs to shift first.
Yes.
Um, and that's where working with someone is going to be really important because, yeah, your breathing is so intertwined with anxiety. We can make ourselves feel anxious just by changing the way that we breathe. And the opposite is true as well. But trust that and, yeah, get support if that's your experience, but you're curious to try. I think that's important to point out.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's like anything really, just start out slow and find your way as you go, don't go hard and fast
Yeah, just
first
yeah,
up.
curiosity, right? One of our top
Yeah.
values.
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, well, I don't know what else you want to talk about. I mean, there's a million and one things, but um, I guess from my point of view, my wish is that people would give it a go. Don't and keep an open mind about it. Stay curious, as you say, because the evidence is there that it can have such an enormously positive impact. Caveat on what you said earlier that it might not for, depending on how you do it for some. But I just think that, if we can maybe learn to appreciate our breath work like we appreciate nourishing ourselves with the right food, what if we could adopt that mindset where if I learn to breathe in a way that helps my body and I feel better for it, just like I am conscious of the food that I take in and how I nourish myself, I think we would see enormous health benefits in down the line. and for
Yeah,
long.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and one other thing, speaking of longevity, because we're on about that. Um, in one of the clips that I did see James talking about it, he said that, like so many things, Erica, in our 30s, we start to lose our lung capacity as well. That also declines. And that a marker for longevity and living well is how well our lungs perform. So,
Mm.
yeah, from the age of 30, we start to, the volume of air that we can take in and expel reduces. So, and then
Mm.
that flow on effects for our health and well-being. So,
Yeah.
like getting in the gym and doing strength for our muscles and our bones, it seems like we need to be conscious of, potentially focusing on our breath and being aware of
Mhm.
that as well.
Do you
Yeah.
know, that reminds me, I know we're wrapping up, but it reminds me of a very brief story. Um, One of the things that I've always been really surprised by, well, not, I don't know, maybe that's not the right word, but um, because I've been in the yoga world for really most of my life, breathing's just always been a part of what I've done because it's always been incorporated into classes and things. And I remember really clearly once instructing like a breathing practice that we were doing where I think must have had a one-on-one client, and we were just focusing on getting her breath to be a little bit deeper. And I must have had my hand on her back or something. And I sort of said, what would happen if you tried to breathe towards my hand? And she just had this moment of like, bing. She was like, I don't think I ever realized that my lungs were back there. Right? Like, in terms of this capacity that she had to actually breathe in 3
Mhm.
dimensions. She was like, "I think when I visualize my lungs, they're like these tiny little things on the front of my chest, and you've just instructed me to breathe back, and there's so much room back there." And I was like, "Yes, like, wow, what a moment," because we assume, we get given these bodies as we're born, and we don't know anything about them. And yet there are, like, your lungs are huge. They
Mhm.
fill your rib cage, and there's, your heart's nestled in there and whatever as well. But um sometimes, like, that can be just on its own an amazing practice. Just learning to use your whole lungs, being able to breathe back, being able to do stuff. They often put well, I've heard this story anyway. I've never really been in a hospital or certainly not worked in a hospital, but they often put like patients with lung conditions, apparently, don't quote me, on their stomachs because the capacity to breathe is bigger in the back of your lungs. Like, we actually have a lot of room posterior in our lungs to breathe back. And so I remember when I had COVID, I often, the 2 times that I've had COVID, I've laid myself kind of forward on my pillows on my side. I've got a friend who works in cardiopulmonary physiotherapy, and she was like, "This is what to do when you've got COVID." It made such a difference. Like, the ability to breathe when I was in that position was just like crazy. And so that story just really, because the moment for her was so like, it was such a small moment of just going, "Oh my god, I can breathe back there." But I would bet money that haven't seen her in a really long time, but I would bet that that was very transformative,
Mhm.
because if you experience anxiety, if you, have a tendency to have a lot of tension in your shoulders, um, we'd always be going, "Okay, how are you breathing?" It doesn't mean that that's the cause, but it's certainly going to have an impact on how you feel day to day.
Yeah.
And so learning just a few techniques that, 1 or 2 things, like, like we said, a couple of the really simplest things from this book, can make such a big difference. So, yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, go out and get it. Bless you, James Nestor, for giving us this gift, this great gift, breath. We'll put links in the show notes, as we say, to uh, to where you can get this book. But yeah, get out there, focus on the breath. It'll change your life. Thanks, Erica.
Oh,
See you
lovely to
next
see
time.
you, Anita. See you
Thanks,
soon.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.